the Delmarvalous Festival.
All right, everybody close your eyes. And Janice, I'm gonna let Janice and Marietta take us to Smith Island. Take us across the bay from Crisfield and let us know what it looks like. And who here has never been to Smith Island? All right, here we go. This is your first invitation.
Now you see how a professional does. She forgot her notes, so who does she throw it over to? Is me. But anyway, Elaine, we have known each other so many years, it's unbelievable. And how I met Elaine, they were gonna put a museum over on Yule. It's on Smith Island, 3 parts to Smith Island. So they were gonna put a museum there, and that's how we met so many years ago. And you know, you hear of Solomon's Island, Deal Island, no, you can drive to them places, right? Well, when you go to Smith Island, you got to park that car, because there's no bridges, no roads, no car ferries, so you're gonna take a boat over to Smith Island. Unless you're rich and got a helicopter, you can go that way too. But we are out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. If you look at a map of the bay, north, south, east, west, we're pretty much in the middle of the bay. So that's where our location is, that's where we've lived all our life, that's how we make our living out of the bay. And you know, I wish you would come see it, because it is a decent price to take a ferry over, go eat a crab cake to the local store on Tylerton. And you know, it's a good day and it don't cost a lot of money.
All right, Marietta, give us a description of what it's like when you're coming in on the boat and coming into Smith Island and coming in through the marsh. What's it look like? So let people know.
Well, you enter in with the buoys, the big beacons, RRR, red on the right when returning, and you enter in. You can go to the west and you will head into Yule, then you'll take a left-hand turn and you'll head into Tylerton, is where I live. And if it's rough, like it was today coming over, the boat was going like this. So you need to be seaworthy to come and respect the water as well. And I'm hoping it'll moderate before we go home this evening. And but it's very picturesque. It's a little tall, we call it a hill. It's not it's not a hill, but it's a tall piece of marshland with a seagull rookery there as you enter into Tylerton. And you can see the church steeples from afar off on all 3 villages, which is one of the main focal points of our island, is our church. That kind of does our government there as well. We have 1 minister. We're predominantly Methodist, and he's a circuit riding preacher who goes to all 3 churches every Sunday. And when you enter into the village, you dock at the main dock, and it would take you probably 20 minutes, and you can walk the whole way around the island. You'll see golf carts. We have a fire department with a wonderful ambulance and a fire engine, and the other village has one that they share, Rhodes Point and Yore, connected by bridge. Where I live, we're completely surrounded by water, so everything that we get is from on a boat, and everything we carry off island is still on a boat. No matter how you do it, it's by boat. Our watermen make their living from the crabbing industry, which is going on now. It's soft-shell crabs and hard crabs, and the picking of crab meat, which the women do. And in the spring, they rockfish, and in the wintertime, they oyster. And all of that is right at our doorsteps, pretty much. Our watermen work in the Tangier Seine in what we call Tyler's Creek and the bay. And the bay gets a lot rougher than the Seine is. It's altogether different.
All right.
Elaine.
What do you
Elaine,
think?
before you start, Marietta was mentioning they come over this morning and it was really windy. If you live on Smith Island, one thing you pay attention to is what it's doing out there. You know, you poke your head out, and if it's windy, and I tell this to some of the places and people get a kick out of it, but if you're going anywhere usually in the morning, not always, but in the morning when we go shopping in Salisbury or anywhere, you know, the first thing we look at is the car dealer flags to see what they're doing, and if they're just doing this, it's a great day. But by the end of the day, when you're going home and they're doing this, you know, that's what a lot of people, not so much now because the boats are more modern, but I remembered older ladies telling me that if they ever got off the island, that's what they always looked for to see what kind of ride they were going to have back home.
And most women know the direction, how the wind's blowing, because you know if it's like this morning, it was northeast, you know it's going to be a head-on wind heading toward Chrisfield, little side to roll. If it's southeast or southwest, it's going to be rough.
Yes, I hate them winds.
But if we're going over and it's northwest, we got a fair wind in. The women knows a lot about the wind just as well as the man does.
This is, you've now kind of got a little bit of a good picture. I don't know if we said that we're 12 miles from Chrisfield, which is where the boat goes from Maryland, and you still have boats in season going from the western shore, right, from Reedville?
Yeah, tourist season.
Only during tourist season. So there's a lot of ways to go. I mean, you can go as a tourist, or you can go on the local ferry. And if you go on the local ferry boat, it can take you to one of the two towns. And the truth is, just be open to walk around and visit. And I'd love to talk about like how your people got to Smith Island, because Smith Islanders can trace their families back to the 1600s. And I mean, these ladies are not that old. I wasn't suggesting that. But you'll notice that this is Janice Marshall and this is Marietta Marshall, and they happen to be related by marriage. Dwight Marshall right here is Mr. Marietta, one of the
We married brothers, yeah.
one of the top watermen on the island. And when I came to the island, first came to the island in 1989 to help. I was sent with the state to help the islanders make a museum. And I met the Marshalls, I met the Tylers, I met Bradshaws, I met Evanses. There were just about a half a dozen surnames. And if you know your English history, you'll recognize them as either being Welsh or from the southern parts of England, Cornwall and Dorset. But why don't you tell me a bit about what you know about your family? And I know that they have different roots from their parents and grandparents.
Well, you know, I'm not good in genealogy, and I don't know a lot of history, but I know what I've been told over the years. And a lot of our people from Smith Island settled in Jamestown. And
Virginia.
Virginia.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jamestown, Virginia, and then they moved on over to Accomack County, Virginia, which is on the eastern shore of Virginia. And then, you know, a lot of them just went up and down the coast finding good places. And believe it or not, a lot of it, they were looking for land to farm. It weren't the water so much as the farming was. So you go to Smith Island now and you're not going to see much farmland, I guarantee you that. But, you know, they did adapt to the water for, you know, and that's provided a very good living. But my daddy, he was born and raised on Tangier Island, Virginia. And my mama's people was from Tillman Island, Maryland. Now, my daddy got a job in the crab house working on Smith Island when he was young. That's how he met my mother. My grandfather got a job working on a sailing skipjack in Tillman with a Smith Island waterman. That's how he ended up on Smith Island and married my grandmother. So that's where I am, right in the middle, Smith Island.
So you were going to have wet feet no matter what.
Yeah, I was going to be island no matter what.
And how about you, Marietta?
Well, I don't even know. I'm here. My mom's maiden name was Jones, and
A nice Welsh name.
Welsh name, and they came from Solomon's Island and come across the bay working on boats. My dad was a skipjack captain, and he was an Evans. And I really don't know where the Evanses came from. Dwight, you or the Middletons? My grandmother's name.
Cornwall,
And then their ancestors were Middletons. I claim Kate Middleton and all that.
I'm sure.
And that's all I know. They've always been watermen. My dad, both of my grandfathers, and my grandmothers as well was just all water. Worked with their husbands, cutting soft-shell crabs or working in the water business along with their husbands. But
Marvin Jones,
I said that he was from Solomon's Island, weren't he?
what happened
I don't know.
when they escaped from the prison down on the end of Point Lookout during the Civil War.
Is that right?
Who's this? There's a new
That
one for
was-
the,
That was Mama's.
come on
That
in.
was my mother's great grandfather, I think. And he said he escaped prison, so God knows where we hailed from.
There we go.
Honey, I don't know. All I know is we're right in the middle of the bay, and that's it. And we're from England, and in case you don't notice, we do have an accent. And my children, we have 4 of them, and they'll say, "Ma, you ought not to talk like that." I said, "I can't help it. It's the way I was made. That's the way God wanted me, and that's the way I am. I'm not putting on airs. That's just the way I am."
And there are reasons why the islanders have a very distinct accent or dialect, and it is not necessarily because, it is because they have roots, abroad in England and came here, but it's because they live on an island, in isolated communities. And wherever you find isolated communities, you often find not only language, but accents that go back, that have a lot of history, because the people did not listen. We're not listening to the voices of people coming from elsewhere, or television or radio that early on, which is another story in itself. But I have to tell you, I was in Cumberland, which is out in the west, and I was in this little Narrows, very isolated area, and I'm in a store, like a hardware store in the middle of nowhere, and I hear a guy talking. I said, "Oh my God, there's a Smith Islander," And I'm like, go up to him, and I said, "Where are you from?" And he's like, "Right there." He was from such a small area and had always been and had never left, that in fact, he had saved, that dialect, and it was very similar. And we find that, and we have a wonderful story, because sometime when we were working on the museum, and the museum is in Ewell, which we call the capital, and it took us 7 years between the idea and the funding and the building and the design and the artwork and the movie and all the things that we did to make it happen. So I got to know absolutely everybody on the island. It was a true gift. And I forgot what I was saying. Do you have any idea what I
Yeah,
was
we were
saying?
talking about language. And were you going to North Carolina? or
And
what?
yes, I was. Thank you.
See how
We've
long we've been together?
And a woman calls me who is charged with building a museum from an isolated island on the Outer Banks, called Harker's Island, but it has been connected by a bridge. And so she'd heard about our museum. She knew it was a grassroots museum. It was all about them. In fact, it was her brother, Marietta's brother, who at a meeting said, "Well, if people want to learn about us, they come here one day as tourists, as visitors, and they think they know all there is to know about our island. But if they could see us the other 364 days, then they would understand us." So they made a film, a 20-minute film, about their lives the other 364 days. And we welcome you to come to the island, and if you come to the visitor center, and you can see it, or I think you can actually buy it from them as well.
The step demo is starting now.
What are we gonna miss? What are we missing?
I don't know. I couldn't make it out.
I gotta go. Anyway, this Karen Amsbacher came from Harker's Island, North Carolina, and I bring her and a whole group of people from her island to Smith Island to meet the people, to see what we're doing with our museum, to understand, And this group comes to Tylerton, population 75,
42 now.
now 42. They start talking. I didn't even understand what they were saying. They were speaking everything. They spoke this. You can say better.
Yeah.
You can actually describe it better. What has happened, in that, and which tells you about people coming to island, who have come to the islands over the centuries and settled.
Yeah. When Karen come in and she started talking, I said, "You're just like us. You sound like us." And it did. And another thing about this talking, how we talk, we're talking proper right now according to what Tangier does, because I wish we still were in the position Tangier is in, and I believe our children have got away from it more. Tangier still talks the dialect more of Elizabethan, would you say, Elaine?
I question that.
Well, anyway, I think they sound like they're from Australia, but my daddy was from there, so. But anyway, they school their children from pre-K through high school on the island, and that makes a big difference. You know, but our kids, they start high school in 8th grade, and they go to the mainland, so they've got the mainland, you know, talk coming in, and most of the young people that's talking now,
They don't talk like us.
no, they don't even talk like they're from Smith Island. So I hate to see our island lose so many of its characteristics, because I think the brogue and the dialect we had, I've never been ashamed of it. I've always thought it was great. You know, it sets you aside. So I never tried to change. I wouldn't know how.
People like to say, the first thing people will say about Smith Island is, you know, they speak an Elizabethan brogue, which means a language that goes back to Shakespeare's time. But that's kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, I question that, and
Yeah.
we did a lot of research, and it's like, it really isn't, but it's just an easier thing to say. I mean, there's a lot of things that are easy to say about small communities. But I'd love you to talk about, since you started to mention it, but, oh, by the way, the relationship between North Carolina, Harkers Island, and Smith Island, this is now, what, 20 years later? And they're
25.
25,
Still coming.
25 years
25th
later, because
anniversary.
their museum is now having its 25th anniversary, and guess who's going to go down and sort of share, you know, traditional, you know, fare and stories.
And
they've
we've
been-
remained, you know, it's like, just like we're brothers and sisters. They come to my house and stay, you know, and it's not awkward. It's just like family.
Right.
And everyone we've met on these trips, that's how they've been. And I don't know if it's island people or water people or what kind of people, but it seems we have the same interest in.
Yeah. So when I started going in 1989, there were 475 people living on Smith Island. Now, what do you recall the highest number ever?
It's over
Which was
600 when I grew up.
over 600 when she grew up, and I think during the war there might have been in the 700s max.
Long
max.
time.
And they lived on these high points that they call hammocks, right? Everybody correct me if I speak out. And one of the things that's so amazing is that as you know, as it became necessary, they had to pull the villages together, the communities together. So they would move off from the distant places, the hammocks, and bring them to ultimately the three places, Rhodes Point, Tylerton, and Ewell. And there's amazing photographs of them moving houses, which we hear about a lot, the houses. There are whole streets in Crisfield where the houses have come from Holland Island, for example.
Cambridge too.
And Cambridge,
Yeah.
right. And they would move, and your church, tell us about your church. Your church came over, was disassembled.
Yeah, it was
Oh, yeah, from
disassembled.
Long Branch.
Yeah, it was built into Pines. Was it the Pines? What was that called?
Long Branch?
Yeah,
Long
it was
Branch?
yeah.
Was it part of Long
And
Branch?
Pines too.
Yeah, I thought it was,
Church of the in Pines.
yeah, the church in the Pines, they dismantled it because the land was sinking there, you know, and washing away. The bay has a way of eating our land. You know, it's not hard, rocky soil, it's sandy soil, so you get a lot of erosion over the years. So people were leaving that area, and the county, they said, Miss Virginia and them didn't want to keep up the bridge. And the people didn't have the money to keep up the bridge that connected the two. It was just a walking bridge. And people started leaving, so they dismantled the church in the Pines and moved it over on Tylerton and built the church. And it still amazes me. Now look, they didn't have no cranes and no modern equipment and that church is a pretty big church. And if you ever get over there, it's always open for you to visit and come in and look. It'd be a pleasure to have you. But you know how they did things. I don't think we'd even know where to start today.
The chandeliers are probably from the floor up, this tall, the big Victorian, it's beautiful, the altar rail and all of that.
All the
It's from
windows were
old church.
preserved and bought over, and then they bought one big front window. The front window was bought for the new church when it was built.
They changed the shape a little, but
Yeah.
when they rebuilt it. Why don't you tell us about going to school on the island? But Marietta, you wanna?
I will.
Yeah.
We, I'll tell you, what's changed more than anything is going to high school. We went to grade school, one-room schools, and stayed in that school until we got of age. When I grew up, we started high school in the 9th grade. And I'll tell you the difference. The Crisfield, the Somerset County paid the Islanders room and board, we called it, and Crisfield people took it on as a way of making money in their own homes because they're a waterman's village as well. So they would take 3 or 4 island students and they would get a check from the county that would pay for Monday through Friday. We went on the school boat named the Island Star, and we went back on a Monday and we would come home on a Friday. The difference now is they go daily on a $600,000 catamaran school boat, air conditioned, heated, and
Seatbelts?
top of the line. No seatbelts,
thought they had
although you
seatbelts.
could use it. No, but I wish they did.
Oh, they have.
And quite different. They go every morning. They leave our dock at 10 after 6, and they come back home 4 o'clock in the evening. So that's a big difference from when I went. We would leave home. Had never been hardly off the island to go anywhere. When I grew up, now they're all over the place. Everybody, the teenagers, has got their own vehicles in Crisfield, which is another story. You open up one thing, but everybody on the island's got their vehicles that they go anywhere they want in Crisfield. I mean, keep them in Crisfield and go anywhere. You can find a Smith Island or anywhere you want, pretty much. But the teenagers now have their own vehicles. We didn't even have our driver's license.
We didn't even have a
We
telephone.
were,
Right.
well,
Much less a
we were
vehicle.
living more of a sheltered life way back when I grew up, which has been 51 years since I graduated from high school. And, but now it's just all totally different.
Now, I grew up on Tylerton, and we went to a one-room school, and
Now, wait,
that's all.
where did Marietta, tell me, where did you grow
I
up?
grew up in Ewell,
She-
the
yeah.
larger part, the capital.
Yeah.
That's always been a little funny thing.
I let them see that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's
I went
larger
to a
part
little
of that.
one-room school. Dwight was in the same class I was in. We had the same teacher for all 6 grades, and we had the same teacher from 1st grade through 6. The whole
6
time
years.
we went to school, we had the same teacher. So that was the difference. And in 1996, I think it was, the county closed Tylerton's one-room school, which at the time was the only one-room school east of the Mississippi. And so the county seen fit to close it, which was hard for our community. But anyway, they said it was on the kind of money. So we had a teacher, we had a teacher's aide, and we had a custodian, plus we had utilities. You know what it cost that last year to run the school? What it cost the county? $60,000. How many 60,000s do you think has been wasted since they closed that school? So, you know, that was a hard thing for Tylerton to accept, but what you gonna do when they kind of, but I mean, $60,000 right now don't seem like a lot of money to run a school. So it was sad.
Let's talk a little about, you talked briefly about the role of the church. The church is the government. You know, there is no government. And it's kind of interesting, this is part of Somerset County, and it should be the jewel of Somerset. Instead, it doesn't seem to get the
No.
love. And so, why don't you tell us a little about how the church would serve
I had
it?
a county commissioner tell me one time he wished Smith Island had just been a few feet down in Virginia, so we'd have been in Virginia. But I mean, there's Smith Island, such a unique place, and they've never thought of it as such. But, you know, that's how it goes. What were we saying?
It's
You got my
better, it's
drink?
better than it used to be though, since I will say this, since the museum, we get more tourists in, and even though tourists, they filter a lot into the island,
Yeah.
income-wise.
Yeah, it's
And
better.
It's a better attraction. We didn't have a whole lot to offer them, only us ourselves,
Yeah, I would have-
working people.
I would send people to Smith Island, because I consider, if you really call yourself a Marylander, who thinks they're a Marylander here? All right, have you ever been to Smith Island? Until you've been to Smith Island, you're not a Marylander. How many of you have been to the outdoor show in Golden Hill in Dorchester County? You're not a Marylander. Those are 2 of your merit badge check-offs, so remember that.
73 years in February 23rd and 24th. It'll be our 73rd show.
Wow. This is Rhonda Aaron, who's from Hooper's Island.
Five-time world champion muskrat.
Yes, she
And her
is.
mother, Nellie Flowers. Rhonda has been the many-time world champion muskrat, female muskrat skinner. And
Yeah.
But my mother skinned in 1938 when she was 10 years old.
Is that
and
right?
that's part of our tradition, like your tradition.
Yeah, good.
Because my brother skins, my son, my nephew, me, and my cousin's little girl. My cousin's little girl's 14. She's a junior world champion.
yeah,
for her.
stays in the family. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We kind of started with how the church plays the role of government.
The church is the governing body on Smith Island. We've never had an elected official. We don't have a mayor or town council. We do have a church council.
Yeah, we got a town council.
Well, it's
Dalton
called a
has.
town council, but it's meeting in the church basement, right?
They have the meetings, but we
Yeah, I
have
know.
an annual meeting.
But the church has always been the governing body of Smith Island, because I don't think, the town council are the church members too.
What about taxes
No,
and what about,
I mean,
doesn't someone go out from the church and go collecting for the town?
They
used
do
to.
in Yule, but
They do in
Not
Yule.
on Tylerton.
Okay, but they would,
Each community has such a different way. Each community supports their own church, they support their own community. We don't help each other. So Tylerton handles their affairs, Ewell handles their affairs, and Rhodes Point, same way.
it's 3 different languages on the island, each part of the island. When I moved to Tylerton, they said, you talk like a North Ender, which means Yule. That was the northern part of the island. And when Dwight would come up home, they'd say, he's a drum pointer, which meant a Tylerton person. But all 3 parts of the island speak different languages, a different little bit of a twang. They have different, what do you call it, ways of doing money work, like she was saying about collecting for the preacher, or the church in general. The other 2 parts, a lot of people don't go to church as much, and they have to support their church through and by a weekly collection or monthly. I don't even know how they do that. But Tylerton supports itself. We don't have collections and stuff.
where's your water come from? Drinking water?
Each
Pennsylvania.
town owns their own waterworks. We have artesian wells on the island.
Comes from Pennsylvania.
They say it comes through the mountains of Pennsylvania, through deep veins in the earth, so that is a pretty deep vein, because we have some of the best water on the island, but Rhodes Point has its own waterworks, Tylerton has its own, and Ewell has its own, and each community supports its own system.
We should get down to one of the most important, I can't say this with Dwight Marshall in the room, but I think the women's stories, it's when I got to the island, it was all about watermen. You know, everybody's writing books about watermen, everyone's doing films about watermen, everyone's talking about skipjacks and, crabbing and oystering and the watermen. And I get there and, the watermen are all doing their thing, which is huge.
You know what I always said, the men crab and oyster and the women do the rest.
But there's a second economy, which is really in the hands of the women. So why don't you both tell us, what that means, what it is that the women do?
Well, when I was growing up, the women didn't do much. They tended to the crab house and they tended to the family. But as time, I guess, by the 1960s, the world was opening up to us. And with television and everything coming in, we knew it was other things out there. Our island, we were perfectly content there. I mean, all our needs were met there. We had a doctor there. We had 5 or 6 stores that would get beautiful things in. We could do our shopping there. Nobody had cars then. And to hear of a woman driving a car, I thought that was the greatest thing I had ever heard of in my life. Of course, growing up like that, I never thought I would ever drive a car, no way, or even have a car. But that's the time we grew up in, and how times has changed, and I think the women decided, we got more needs because our children started going to the mainland to school, and you know how that pressure is. They need more clothes to wear. So the women, I think by the late 50s, 50s, 60s, women started to learn that they could start picking crabs. And you know, they pick pretty good crab meat. And so they decided, well, I think I've got some people on the mainland. They got neighbors, so that's how it started spreading. You'd pick some for your family, then they would sell to somebody else, and their friends would want some, and it just became a business part of the island, which has helped the women, you know, help support the family, because everybody just about needs 2 incomes on the island now. So that's how we started, and I think that's when times started changing, because women felt more independent. You know, I liked the thought that I had my own money and could help the family in any way needed.
When I started going, I would go out and visit with the women who were picking crabs in their outhouses.
Yes, we did.
The outhouse is the building behind their houses.
Sheds.
Like a mainland shed.
Better known as sheds.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us, and we would go in, and there would be, you know, a group of women sitting together around tables, and, you know, with piles of their husbands' crabs that had been steamed, and picking them. And Smith Island crab meat is special. It's picked differently. Why don't you tell us about that? If you get Smith Island crab meat, don't send it back because it's different. Tell us what's different about it.
It's all, the whole crab's picked into 1 pound. It's your claw, your lump, and your back special. All in, they do the whole crab into one thing, which makes a delicious crab cake.
The claw meat is usually the best tasting anyway. When you go to eat a crab, you enjoy the claws.
It
Yeah.
is. You can
So,
incorporate
you know,
that all
what's
together,
gonna,
makes a good
if you
crab
get a
cake.
pound of lump or special or claw, it's gonna be better if you mix it all together. The whole crab's gonna be a lot better.
Right, and why don't you tell us what your responsibilities are regarding soft crabs? And does everybody know soft crabs? Everybody eat soft crabs? We're in high season. We're already in high season, which is unusual,
A
isn't
good
it?
season.
So why don't you tell us
Yeah.
what, I don't think people understand, because when we started going to the island, you know, we were gonna start sending tourists to people's houses, give them maps to go, but they're very busy, particularly during soft crab season. Why don't you tell us what the responsibilities are, Marietta?
Well, the men go out and over home we call it a peeler run. The peeler crab is what turns into your soft shell crab. You have a matter of time to catch it, and then you have to fish up, what is it, Dwight, every 3 or 4 hours according to the tide. You have to take them out of the water before they get what they call a buckram stage, which is paper shell. So you're constantly to that float checking them. You don't want them to bite each other because it'll cause the crab to die. Any weak or crabs that are not fit to go to market, you cut and wrap them, freeze them, and that's your frozen soft shell. The fresh ones goes to New York and Crisfield, and it's a constant 24-hour job. I mean, they're constantly about every 4 hours, somebody's to the float harvesting the crabs up. And the women, right now the peeler run is on for those that are doing it, and that is very, very intense labor. But it's over in a quick time as well. It lasts about 3 weeks maybe. And then after that, things will settle down. They use the male crab to coy the female.
To what?
And
I hate that
You
story.
say koi?
they do.
I always hated
the bait,
that story.
The bait in a peeler pot. There's a hard crab pot, and then there's a peeler pot. The peeler pots is what is going on with the peeler run. So the bait for that is not fish; it's a male crab,
Live
and you
one.
get a nice male crab, a handsome Jimmy, and the little women peeler crabs
Yeah.
just flock to this male crab.
This one
And that
male can
crab
catch
pot will be
100.
full of, the male don't shed, it's the female that sheds right now. That's what's called the Delmarvalous run.
Wait, you're saying that the females are shedding first? And tell us why usually we don't see soft shells until sometime in June. Am I right about
The
that?
temperatures
Later.
are so-
Temperature makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. It's been such a warm spring, it's caused everything to come off early.
Yeah.
Everything's
So we're
early.
seeing, yeah, so it's,
You know, talking about soft crabs, we had to do something this year that we've never done since we've been married, 50-some years of marriage. Bobby can't work anymore on the water, so he had to go down to Bob Daniels and buy 3 dozen soft crabs. Something we've never done since we've been married. But when you don't have a boat, you don't have a way of catching them, and you're hungry for soft crabs, he just went on down and bought 3 dozen from a local
This was
waterman.
in Chrisfield, right?
Yeah, and if any of you ever want seafood, if you live near an area where you got local watermen, talk to them. Now, don't expect to get it give to you. We bought out, because they work hard. But you're going to get a better deal and a better seafood if you know a local waterman to go get them from. So that's why instead of going to the crab dealer, we went to the local waterman and bought our soft crabs. So that's a little hint for any of you that.
Do you have some questions, by the way? Yes, sir.
They didn't tell you the whole story.
I knew they were holding
Go
back.
ahead.
Male crab, he holds his arms out like this, and he draws the female in, and when she comes in, he grabs her under his belly and holds her tight. Won't let her go, and he'll fight anything that comes try to take her away from him. Don't make no difference if it's a big stingray or a shark or what. He'll fight anything to the death to hold her. He keeps her so long till she gets ready to shed her shell. And then we're
like
on
a
a double here.
protection.
So
Not yet, no.
he sheds the shell, and he takes the female crab, and then he turns her over, and he holds her just as tight as he can hold her. And that's when the mating process starts. And if you or me or what comes try to take that female away, you're in for a fight. He's going to bite you if he can. But that's how he holds her until she gets hard again and matures again, and then he lets her go.
So he holds her until she gets hard enough so she won't be taken as a soft shell.
Take care of herself.
Yeah.
How long is the cycle?
Well, it depends on the weather. Some people said about every month, and then I think if you have a real hot summer, the water temperature gets really hot. Sometimes it's quicker than that.
But I mean, the mating process, it's not for a month or so.
Well, no, it's not for a whole month. Like I said, if the weather is really warm, temperature is really warm, that mating cycle will happen. I've seen a people run anywhere from 2 or 3 days. This spring it run a long time because we had a lot of cool weather that held it back. The warmer the water, the quicker they turn up as a fever and shed.
Girls.
Do you go out and crab your pots? Do you find those in the pot?
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna ask for one quick soft crab recipe.
Honey, the easiest thing in the world, just clean them.
Mix
And
it up.
I try to pat some of the water out of them because they will spit and sputter. And just salt and pepper them and roll them over in flour, put them in some shortening and fry them till they're a good golden brown. Easy as anything you'd ever want to fix.
I roll mine in pancake mix, gives it a little sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And it-
Well, hold on.
Isn't there a law or anything against, or a limit for female crabs, or has that been obliterated?
Well, that's the adult female crab.
That's a hard
when
shell.
When she's got hard,
The adult
and
female?
then when she gets hard, then she'll start what they call producing eggs, which looks like a lemon on her belly,
Right.
and you're not allowed to catch
No.
them.
Sponge
I mean,
crab.
yeah, you're supposed to turn them loose. And then there is a limit on even how many female crabs you can catch that are not pregnant or not shown to pregnancy yet, too. They have a limit, a certain amount every month.
Maybe next year we'll invite the men to talk.
Yeah, it'd
right?
be nice.
No,
Have
seriously,
have
I
some
mean, talk
watermen,
about
it
the
would
men.
be.
I mean, they're
Female
real,
crab doesn't have much meat.
Huh?
Female crab doesn't have much meat.
Well, it's according to what time of the year you catch them.
And they're
Yeah.
sweeter. They're actually.
They are
This
good.
fall
Female.
year, the females are very sweet,
Yeah,
very
very
fat.
sweet.
All right,
Yeah,
so-
it's different times of the year.
since we've just segued to sweet, I want to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
I just want you to know, 1989, Baltimore girl who loves chocolate, starts going to Smith Island regularly, and at every house I visited, and there were many, I was served
Slice of cake.
cake.
Cake,
It was called
Elaine.
cake. After about the 10th house I visited, I said, This is not cake. I've never seen anything like this before. So, I want to tell you guys to tell me, like, what this is, what it was, and kind of what's happened, because therein tells a very big story about economic development and change and the women's lives on Smith Island. So, who wants to tell?
Go ahead, Mary, I
Mary-
think
yeah,
we've
Marietta-
got two different stories. so-
Marietta is kind of the premier Smith Island cake baker on the island in Tylerton.
So when I grew up, my mom and grandmom, they made the layer cakes. They were 2 and 3 and no more than 4 layers, and they were about that thick. And everybody had them, like Elaine said. That was Saturday. You always have you made your cake yet? You always wanted a cake, so if somebody dropped in on Sunday, you had something to pass around and serve them with a cup of coffee. And so one time October for our PTA fundraisers, the women, we would do a cake walk, and the women would make layer cakes. And so anyway, one year we didn't have enough cakes, and we decided to cut them in half. So some woman, and this was way back, I just don't know, it was when I was raising my children, somebody had made 6 layers. They said, well, who in the devil made that? There's 6 layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think, this is just my theory, I think it became a contest among the women of who could make the most tiny layers. I've seen them as high as 12 layers and 16 layers, and they're about that tall. To me, that is not a slice of cake. You want it to fit on a dish. So one day I was busy, and tourism called me and asked me would I consider going to Annapolis to try to make it the state dessert. I said, what? They said, we think it's a nice product, and we think it's well worth the acknowledgement. So we went up many times, took many chocolate cakes, and it was about 8 of us. We went to, up to Annapolis. Yep, Lane, you were one of them. And we had 5 oppositions. And we were very proud. They were dedicating a kayak trail home. And my home, they were putting their knapsacks, just kind of a little place to put their stuff, in the phone rings. And we got the call from Annapolis, said it had become the Maryland State Dessert. Well, you'd have thought we'd won the Super Bowl. Yay! We were going. We were happy as we could be. And the reason being that was considered was because our watermen were restricted in a lot of the crabbing rules, winter and summer, no matter what they were doing. License was getting more expensive, the crab pots were getting more expensive, boats more expensive to maintain, less watermen, but the women wanted to filter an income as well. So I believe that is why this became to help the economy on the island, and it has. It has filtered a lot of money to our island, although there are many places that does sell the Smith Island cake. I was asked one time, is it a Smith Island cake if it don't come from Smith Island? I don't answer that. You have to answer that yourself. But we do it. A lot of the women does it, and everybody over there, just about everybody, makes a nice product. So.
And because it became such a phenomenon, I mean, you know, you go to the store when you got off the store, which no longer exists, when you get off the ferry, and you would go in to, you know, get your crab cake, your soft shell crab, your fig jam, your slice of Smith Island cake. It kind of became, suddenly it became synonymous with Smith Island, this cake. So Janice and I kind of worked, does anybody know the name Frances Kitching? Frances Kitching was kind of the hostess of Smith Island. Frances Kitching was the person who first opened her house to visitors. It was when they were actually laying the doing the electrical work for Smith Island. In what decade was this?
Gee whiz.
40s.
Yeah, late 40s, early 50s.
Early 50s, and she had one of the biggest houses on the island, so she put them up, but she also cooked for them. And so she became the most famous cook on the island, and the Mrs. Kitching's Smith Island cookbook is still, it's got to be in its 10th printing. But guess what? None of the first printings ever had Smith Island cake. No, because it was just cake. It was not anything special. They added it in a much later, only recently after it became the state dessert. But Janice and I, so the one question I always asked, among others, while doing the research was, where'd this come
What
from?
is this?
Who made the first
What
one?
is
What is
this?
this? What is this? So why don't you tell us? 'Cause Janice,
Elaine, when she first started coming, we were doing fundraisers for the museum too, and people were bringing a lot of cakes in for bake sales and things like that. And Elaine would look at it, she'd say, "What's this?" I'd say, "It's cake." She said, "No, what is it?" I said, "It's cake, Elaine." What we considered normal, everyday cake, it took somebody off the island to recognize it was something different, because it is done in one place in Harker's Island. It's a woman, she was 95 and still making these cakes in Harker's Island. So Elaine and myself has tried to do a little bit of research and find out. We can't find out where they came from. But my aunt, she passed away about a year ago.
at what age?
And she was 90, she would turn 90 that year. So I asked her, I said, "Kathy, did Mylena make these cakes?" She said, "Yeah, that she did, as long as I can remember."
And how far back would that go? What year?
Well, it would have had to been over 100 years, way over, because she said, and I remember too, we didn't have them as plentiful as we do now. They were something special, because she said, yeah, that she did. Every Christmas, Ma had to have her chocolate walnut cake. You know what that was? Chocolate walnut cake. They would get the walnuts off the trees over home and bust them up, and in between the layers, they would put walnuts with the chocolate. Now, that is good too if you've never tried it. So, we don't know. And then another thing, we were wondering about the small layers. I don't know. We've just been trying to think of things. I have no idea how this started. But you start thinking back, and my grandmother, Mylena, never had a stove with an oven. Never. She had a oil burner stove. You remember them with them tall? Anyway, the burners on them was like that. That's how tall they were. And it was like an iron stove. And do you remember that we called them a baker? Like a tin box baker? Now, you ain't that much younger than me.
She's a lot older than I.
See, she was highfalutin. She was from the capital.
There you
I
go.
grew-
There it
I
is.
grew up on Tylerton.
Hey,
But
I came from a
anyway,
big family. They mine a
yeah, as I remember, she never had an oven. She had a wood stove that she cooked on some, and then she had this coal oil stove. And under the stove, she kept, it was a tin baker, it was called. It was about this wide, about this high. It was about, you remember them, Dwight? Anyway, and it had one oven rack. And we were talking, we said, now what's easier to bake? Because them bakers weren't much, and most people didn't have ovens then. I believe they started putting less in the pan, to bake it quicker, because you had to bake one layer at a time. I mean, them that didn't have, and this has been a long time ago. And I remember as a little girl, she would haul that baker out, set it on the stove, let it get hot, and put her pan of biscuits in there. That's how she'd bake them. And I found an old book one time, and I think Elaine looked it up, these bakers, and they were sold, was it Spiegel catalog or
Sears
somewhere?
catalog, right.
Sears. And she found them, and they were just a lightweight tin. They weren't nothing big, and they weren't the best baking instrument in the world, but
You weren't gonna get a 1 inch,
No.
a 1.5 inch
and I
layer.
think a lot of time the women on the island that really didn't have a lot and wanted to make a cake, I believe that's a lot of the history of it, because they've been around a good while.
So this is what happens when you stick with something and keep asking questions over a long period of time. And now I think our biggest question is, how long? How much longer, will Smith Island be around?
Yeah.
The population is now 200 in all three.
Less than that.
186.
Yep, I know, it's scary.
I tell you, we
186.
did the census the other week because of the pastor. 87 on Yule, 49 on Rhodes Point, 42 in Tylerton. But we
Wait a
are,
minute, 42 in Tylerton and
Uh-huh.
49 in Rhodes Point?
yep,
Wow.
but we are getting 3. The bells are moving back.
Oh,
So
are
we're
they?
getting
Good.
3, we'll soon be up to 45.
Mhm.
Yeah, very tiny. Everybody knows I'm up here today doing this. You ain't got a secret in the world when you live on an island.
So speaking of secrets,
Couldn't even cheat over there,
Huh?
couldn't even cheat over there.
No, everybody knows it.
You can do it, but you be sure to know
Yeah,
that
right.
they will know
It's
you're
gonna
there.
be told if you do.
Y'all,
what I want, we're actually going to end this session unless you have some questions. But I want you to know that we're going to be making or preparing Smith Island cake, because we don't have the oven right now. But we will show you how to make a Smith Island cake at what time and where.
Right about now.
No, right about now, and where?
Well, we better get to
And where will we do it?
It will be in the Henson Center. Just come out, go out here to the right, and then turn left down the hallway. And it's right behind where the crab picking and the oyster shucking is happening.
So we invite you to join us. If you have more questions, bring them with you, and we will, you will see the Smith Island cake making demystified by our two master artists, Janice and Marietta.
samples?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
plenty.